See if I'm back on here. Alright, so it looks like the stream lost connection for a minute, but it looks like we're back, so I guess I'll just repeat what I said. So anyway, this is going to be one of those streams where um, as a patron you can send me things to react to, respond to. It doesn't just have to be for that, by the way. If you have just a topic, a theological topic, a philosophical topic that you want me to address, I can do that. Um, and all it entails is you just letting me know what you want me to address to talk about. So that's that. So this is so I'll be basically responding to this ex-traditionalist. He calls himself the gay ex-trad. And before we got disconnected, I was just kind of saying that it seems very rare. It seems much rarer for um, to come across some like an atheist who's deconverted specifically from a more traditional high church expression of Christianity, like traditional Catholicism, traditional Anglicanism, um, traditional Lutheranism, like high church expressions of Christianity. I tend to notice that you don't get all that many defections from, especially if they're born and raised in that environment. You do get a whole slew of um, deconversions from like a more evangelical, low church, Protestant expression of Christianity. In fact, those are the ones who've sort of dominated the anti-Christian skeptic scene for a very, very, very long time. Uh, Throughout the early 2000s, the 2010s, all of that. So it is interesting when you come across, and I feel like it's probably going to happen a little bit more in the future. I think maybe the next wave of anti-Christian, like atheistic content on the internet is probably going to be people who come from a more like traditional expression of Christianity, a traditional upbringing in that kind of environment. Um, but uh, but I don't really know if that's exactly this guy's background. I haven't really watched any content from him, so it should be interesting. Now this is he's gonna try to take a swing at Father Mike's argument against the moral legitimacy of homosexual acts, and I've seen this video before from Father Mike. I actually have some quibbles with it in terms of how he articulates the argument, but this is basically going to be this guy's attempt at undermining classical, traditional, natural law thinking on homosexuality, which is also kind of rare because usually this argument that's presented out of the Thomistic or classical, scholastic metaphysical framework is not touched upon very much by popular atheistic and secular uh, content creators. They usually don't go after this argument because I don't even know if they're really exposed to it much. They either see it as beneath them because they're only aware of uh, laughable strawmen of the argument, or they just haven't engaged at all with like its more sophisticated varieties, and so that's why they don't touch it. Usually, it's just when they attack like the Christian teaching on homosexuality, they're trying to undermine the scriptural basis for it, and really that's about it. Like, so this should be interesting. I'm just gonna send out the link here on X, and then we'll get started. All right. Okay, gonna get started here.
You are not tolerated. Did I just violate the nature of a chair? You don't need birth control. You don't need gun control. You need self-control. I'm gay. All of us have something in our lives that we hate about ourselves.
What if I told you that chairs prove that being gay is sinful? You might laugh, but if you were...
Well, let's start right off the bat touching on the chair issue, because I know that what Father Mike's argument is going to be. Father Mike is going to basically try to make a broadly Aristotelian argument from essentialism, and is going to use the chair, the concept of a chair, to illustrate precisely that argument. Now, I have a problem when some Thomists do this, specifically like popularizers of Thomism. And the reason for it is because it opens itself up to a whole slew of easily avoidable counter objections. Like if you try to illustrate essentialism by way of artificial analogies, you open yourself up to the counter objection that will specifically aim at attacking um, like the mind's possibility for narrowing down universal definitions of things. And the reason that counter argument can work in this case is because an artifact, an artificially created thing, such as a chair or a table, its definition isn't fixed by nature. Its definition is imposed upon it by the mind, and so it doesn't. It's not really amenable to clear cut mind independent definitions, and it makes it very easiest, therefore, for the anti essentialist or the nominalist or whatever you want to call them to use that weakness as a justification for refusing to acknowledge any and all mind independent uh, essences or forms or definitions. So I don't like using those analogies right off the bat. I think they open themselves up to a certain kind of easily avoidable weakness, as I've been saying. But let's hear about let's take Father Mike's argument and try to steelman it a bit as we watch through this video. Um, and if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to support the stream, you can either do powerchat.live/classicaltheist or you can use the super chat system here.
If you are a faithful Catholic like I was, you might remember this talk that now has over 1 million views. Father Mike Schmitz is a celebrity priest with a number one podcast with tons of books out there. Catholics love this man. He is not fringe. I spent years as a card-carrying Catholic, as an apologist.
Okay, it looks like this guy was a traditional Catholic. Now, I want to say one other thing. I said this in the other stream before it got disconnected, which is that one thing I noticed that in almost every case, people deconvert from traditional Catholicism, like sophisticated varieties of it. In almost every case that I've witnessed, it's usually due to some kind of sexual hang-up within themselves. I mean, that's just the reality.
River Run sent $5 artifacts have no intrinsic essences.
Exactly, a river one. You're right. I mean, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, that when you try to use an artifact, it might be useful if you're using it by way of metaphor, analogy, purely for the sake of an illustration, but A, that can be lost on people, and B, why do that when you can just point to a natural example? Like, I always go to, like, the example of a tree. A tree is so great because, first of all, it's clearly a unity. Like, it's unmistakably an organic unity, a unity in itself. It has its own integral structure to it. It acts and operates and grows as one reality for the sake of its own perfection. And and it's a classic, like, easily discernible example of teleology in nature, right? With the acorn, it's ordered toward its full realization in the full tree. And whether or not you want to say that the mind might have difficulty in clearly articulating, like, the precise definition of a tree, we can grant that. Nevertheless, like, you cannot avoid the fact that it is a unity in itself. It's an irreducible unity. It's an irreducible whole. So that's why I try to as best I can, point to natural examples rather than artificial examples. But anyway, what I was saying was that, like, this guy is really emblematic of, I think, almost everyone in my experience who deconverts from like sophisticated varieties of traditional Catholicism, they're usually it's usually some sexual hang-up. You don't usually find them saying something like, I looked at Joe Schmidt's refutation of like Ed Fazier's version of one of the five ways, and it just didn't pass the smell test, and therefore, like, the entire edifice of classical metaphysics is broken down, and I have to become an atheist now. Like, usually, I've just never encountered that in somebody. It's usually some butchered variety of that, supplemented with personal sexual hangups in almost every case. And I have actually known people who were like really intelligent and sophisticated Thomists.
Methugget sent $6. Hey CT, thanks for all you do. You have helped me immensely. Do you have any opinions on the Norbertines of St. Michael's Abbey? Riverrun sent $5. Well, worse. Artifacts have the functions we assign. So why not sexuality? The analogy is not merely deficient but malum in se.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, everyone. And as for the Norbertines, that I've been looking into that a little bit, but like the Norbertine rite, but it's not something I know enough about to really speak intelligently about. So I want to look into it a little bit more. I actually just heard of this liturgical rite not all that long ago, so I want to look into it. But it is, it's just kind of an example of like the multifaceted variety of liturgical expressions that we have. I mean, even in the Latin West. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you very much for the support, though. All right, but yeah, I do know like a Thomist, he was at one point like a really respected Thomist, who like was into Aristotle, was into St. Thomas, uh, and he eventually became like an agnostic and an atheist, and then we found out later that he was, had closeted issues. And that just communicates to me that it's not really all intellectual. It hardly ever is. Anyway.
I even met Father Mike in person. I went to college to pursue a degree in this type of theology, so today I want to debunk this talk that kept me in the closet for years. Let's jump into it.
None of what I'm going to talk about today has anything to do with tolerance.
Well, we're off to a fantastic start.
In the church, you are not tolerated by the church. Not only that, you're not accepted by the church. The truth of the matter is, you belong in the church.
So this is an hour-long talk, and Father Mike spends about the first 5 minutes talking about how he doesn't like the name of the talk because he doesn't believe in tolerance, because tolerance is something that you do to other people, but gay people belong in the church. I like the sentiment, but it's entirely vacuous. What he's saying is, you can feel gay, you just can't act on it. Now that we have the pleasantries out of the way, let's get into his actual argument.
God's plan for you as a human being is that your body...
But like, what else are you supposed to say, though? Like, okay, let's say you don't accept or buy this natural law argumentation. I'm sure you would buy a whatever kind of argumentation you want for the need, the moral obligation to resist various sexual tendencies toward certain activities that everybody would acknowledge are morally repugnant or morally abhorrent. And I'm not going to name them because we're on YouTube and I don't want YouTube to think of the associations that I'm trying to make, but I think you all know what I'm talking about, that he would acknowledge, at least, intellectually, that those expressions of sexuality need to be shunned, and if anybody has like a certain proclivity toward them, they would have to just resist those inclinations in order to be a morally upright, virtuous person. So, therefore, this very same sentiments that you seem to be attacking on the grounds of I don't know what, you would have to adopt those very same sentiments toward those expressions of sexuality, but just not towards these expressions of sexuality that you personally are involved in.
Body and soul are together.
I don't get it. Could you provide me an example, Father Mike?
Could you come forward, please? Could everyone just look at Kevin's body?
I take it all back. I did not need an example. That was like weirdly creepy.
If you are your body, then what you do with your body matters.
Once again, nobody is saying that what you do with your body doesn't matter.
The nature of a thing is the what it isness of a thing.
What he's doing is laying out the idea of teloi or teleology, which is this Catholic understanding that everything in the universe has an invisible blueprint.
Not just a Catholic understanding, by the way. It's like I mean, I guess you could say a pre-modern understanding, but it's an understanding that is shared by Platonists, Aristotelians, um, by any kind of philosophically realist metaphysical scheme. It's not just Catholics.
Print in it, and this tells us exactly what things can and can't be used for. Let's jump into how we can figure out God's hidden invisible rule book and everything. I think with chairs.
This shares the nature of chair.
Okay.
What is a chair for? To sit upon. I am
Music is really annoying, by the way, but there's nothing I can do about it.
using the chair for the end with which it was created.
What he's doing here is setting up this worldview that everything, both things created by humans and all natural things, were created by God for a purpose, and that everything out there has this invisible, undetectable, unverifiable, secret rulebook that if you cross, you go to hell. Can we empirically verify that things have teloi? No. Do we have a method to reliably test what teleology tells us? No.
This is to sit upon, this is to set things upon. But watch this. Wait for it. Oh!
Well, you can actually, and I don't like that Father Mike is trying to appeal to artificial, like, artifacts. I don't like that he's trying to appeal to artifacts to make his point, but let's use a better example. Let's go back to the tree example. Now, the fact that it changes at all, like the very fact of change itself implicitly like change itself is implicitly teleological, because in any instance of change you have an unrealized potentiality that reduces from that state of potentiality to actuality. And if it's going to do that, well then its terminus, it's like the termini of these reductions from a state of potentiality to actuality, that terminus has to be virtually present, at least in the order of in the proper and due order of causality. Otherwise, it couldn't change at all, because it wouldn't have a there wouldn't be any kind of like pre-established destination that would constitute the end of that instance of change. Like, that has to be present in order for the change to occur at all. Like, the actuality towards which it's tending has to be present in the order of causality in order for that potentiality to be reduced to that state of actuality. So, like, the acorn, if it's going to change, if it's going to develop and grow into the mature tree, then that notion, that idea, that formality of the full mature expression of itself has to be present implicitly in the acorn itself in order for that change, that development, that the realization of that process of change to actually take place. And that's just observable in reality. And there's also other scientific indications of teleology in nature as well. I mean, I think it's been, said many times that that as opposed to certain Humean formulations of causality that would like to reduce it to mere regularities in nature, these regularities aren't always and everywhere easily observed. I mean, you take certain like idealizations of laws and precisely as idealizations. They don't regularly, they're not regularly fulfilled in their idealizations. And so, but nevertheless, they are still discernible by the mind. And so that is kind of an implicit recognition that there is a sort of directedness that's inherent in nature, even if it's not that are ordered toward certain ends.
So, question. Did I just violate the nature of a chair? I didn't violate the nature. I just used it for my own purposes.
No, you just put a cup on a chair and you're making it overly complicated.
What is this? I took a table and I propped up my car on the table to change the oil. Would I pretty quickly violate the nature of table? Yeah.
No. What does it mean to even violate the nature of a table? It's an incoherent sentence.
I can use it according to purposes that actually end up ultimately violating the very reason that it exists. Does that make sense?
No, that doesn't make sense, like, at all. What he's saying is that you can only use things for which they were created, otherwise you're violating the magical essence that is a screwdriver. The average person understands we can make descriptive, scientific claims about things, like if you drop a car on certain tables, they will break. People sit on tables. Those claims we can actually investigate. But if you somehow prop your car up on a table, this guy somehow thinks that it is a sin, or at the very least thinks that you're violating the nature of a table and God's gonna get mad or something.
Well, actually, what he's actually just trying to use that as an illustration, as an example, as like a physical metaphor, in other words, to illustrate the deeper point. Of course, there's no violation of teleology if you use artifacts for a purpose other than the sake of which they were created, because they don't have an intrinsic teleology. They're not inherently ordered towards anything. It's not an immanent teleology. It's not an immanent directedness. But the teleology in nature, in natural substances, that's quite a different matter. These natural substances are ordered toward very specific ends by virtue of their nature. And if they're ordered toward these specific ends by virtue of their nature, then the fulfillment of those ends is the basis upon which we discern goodness in things. Because goodness is ultimately rooted in perfection. Goodness is the realization of a perfection. It's the reception of a perfection on the part of some existing reality. It's that which, as Aristotle says, is that which all things desire, and desire is understood through the lens of some inbuilt inclination towards the realization of some perfective end, towards some perfection. And so, if you got a better definition of goodness, I'm all ears, but that's really the only definition of goodness that's rooted in the reality of things and the truth of things. If it's rooted in this principle of perfection, then we can actually speak about it coherently. Because perfection is something that does truly exist in nature. Things do operate in ways that are amenable to the categories of better or worse. The organs of the body, they function in a way that can either be considered better or worse relative to the standard of their perfection. And that's immanent. That's an immanent principle of perfection within the thing itself. And so I think you can much more straightforwardly make the point when you appeal to natural things, natural substances, like trees, like the human body, an animal body. They're classic examples of teleology in nature itself. And by the same token, it's very easy, therefore, to understand and to acknowledge why violating that teleology in nature constitutes an imperfection, therefore an evil, because an evil is understood as such. Insofar as a thing is failing to realize the fullness of
River Run
absolute
sent
perfection.
$5 when mass X etc. falls in Y conditions it will break. Is not a mere description. It's a telly.
Right, I mean, exactly. It pertains to the perfective ends of a thing's nature.
Like that.
Let's talk about sex.
Let's not, especially with you. But pray tell, good sir, what do chairs have anything to do with homosexuality?
Like, what is sex for? Just scientifically, just observing, what is it for? What's the purpose? The two what it is fornesses of sex is procreation and union, or another way to say it is babies and bonding.
What? No. Here's the hidden massive jump in his logic. Yes, biologists can make descriptive claims about biology. Sometimes some forms of intercourse lead to fertilization. People engaging in consensual contact report feeling closer to each other. But here's the big issue. He jumps from making descriptive claims to prescriptive moral absolutes that if you disobey...
Well, you can use the same argument when you're talking about the function of a heart, right? Or the function of lungs, or the function of the eye. Yes, in some cases, the heart will not perform its intended functions. In some cases, the eyes will not perform their intended function. But what remains the case is that an eye or a heart or a lung is unintelligible without reference to its perfective ends that determine what it is. And that's really, I think, what we're getting at. I think this is what underscores the point, which is the conditions under which a reality is intelligible to the mind. And sexuality is unintelligible without reference toward procreation as its primary end and the unitive bond of man and woman as the secondary end for the sake of the primary end. It's unintelligible without reference toward those ends. And if it's unintelligible in principle, it's contrary to reason to try to separate them in practice. Okay, if two things are inseparable in principle, to attempt to separate them in practice violates the principles of practical reason. And if you want to bite the bullet and live a life that's contrary to reason, I guess that's your choice. But we should still be able to agree that it would be contrary to reason. It's contrary to the very basis upon which these realities are intelligible in the first place. Now, this gets to the sort of relative weakness of natural law reasoning, in my view, because you can prove to somebody that an activity or an action is contrary to reason, contrary to practical reason, but where's the force for that kind of argument? It has an intellectual force, but does it really have that? Does it really have like a sufficient degree of inspiration behind it? Like, is it really going to lead somebody to cultivate a life of virtue if they're not even going to acknowledge the like the real cosmic and supernatural significance of the human person? Right? And that can only be rooted in God. That can only be rooted in, I think, an explanation that is fundamentally theological in nature, not just philosophical in nature. Like I said, you can craft like a rationally cogent argument on the basis of pure philosophy, but I think if you're going to really persuade someone to change their life in this area, you have to locate the source for the cosmic significance of human sexuality. And I think you can only do that if you trace it all the way back to its to its cosmic.
Dorian sent $5. Do you find JP2's Tobe helpful in LGBT apologetics? I like how C. West articulates the sacramental worldview. It strikes at the heart of a modernist rationalism that would cast suspicion on endowing the body with inherent meaning.
Yeah, well, I think the theology of the body is useful for that precisely that reason. This is kind of what I'm getting to, is which is that um, if you're going to try to change somebody's lifestyle when it comes to expressions of human sexuality, yes, you can use natural law arguments, but you should be rooting it in something more cosmic in scope. And the way I do that is I actually try to utilize Pope Innocent III's insights about the fourfold kinds of marriage, that marriage is itself a cosmic icon of higher dualities that uh, that actually point toward like the deeper, the prime analogate for marriage. That marriage, that human earthly marriage it doesn't exist self-referentially, but exists as an icon of these higher realities, and it derives its ultimate intelligibility from those higher realities. It's, similarly to how God has no real relationship to the world, but the world has a real relationship to God. Marriage has no real relation to like the duality of like the relationship between God and the just soul. But marriage does have a relationship to those things. In other words, the relationship, the union between God and the soul has no real relationship to marriage, but marriage has a real relationship to those things. And so if you can contextualize marriage and human sexuality, like the male as the active principle, the female as the passive principle, if you can contextualize that within this broader vision of the cosmos, then you can kind of see why it is that the church insists so strongly on arranging your sexual relationships in a way that is harmonious with this duality that is embedded in the deeper realities of the order of nature. That if you are trying to obstruct this natural order within marriage, you're not just violating human sexuality, you're actually violating a certain wisdom, a certain order that transcends human sexuality itself, that pertains to something far broader, far like I said, far more cosmic in scope than like what we do with our sexual organs. So I think that it's really important to, yes, make these natural law arguments and make them properly and make them precisely, but it's also important to point toward the real reason why this is a significant issue. The real reason why God truly does care. The real reason why it's a grave matter to misuse human sexuality in these ways. Why it's like the one area of human moral categories that doesn't really admit to parvity of matter, as the moral theologians say, right? It doesn't admit of slight matter. And then the reason for that is because it was created to be this cosmic icon of the higher dualities, the realities, the relationship between Christ and the church, the relationship between form and matter, the soul and the body, God and the world. You can even trace it back to the inner Trinitarian life of God himself, you know? So it's like this grand cosmic icon, this grand icon of everything. That's why it's significant. That's why it's a grave matter indeed.
You will go to hell. We can say that certain types of sex sometimes lead to babies, but what he's about to reverse engineer is that then if you ever don't do that, it becomes sinful.
Let's talk about eating. This human act is for nourishment and for the pleasure you get from eating.
Can certain organisms digest certain foods? Yes. Do some people say they like certain foods? Yes, I'm all with you. But where is this going?
This is the next part. It's a little sensitive. Very sensitive, actually.
Reader's trigger warning on planet Earth. We're about to talk about eating disorders.
Say someone who eats something for pleasure but doesn't want the nourishment, and so they make themselves throw it back up. Is that person violating the nature of eating? Yeah, Do you know that this hurts you? You know that this is one of those things where you're like, I feel so ashamed.
What do eating disorders have to do with being gay? First, eating disorders aren't sinful. Second, eating disorders don't violate invisible blueprints.
Well, okay, so an eating disorder may not be sinful in itself, but it's for the same reasons, like having that eating disorder. But if you do like starve yourself and you do that knowingly and willingly, and you are, not weighed down by uh, psychological duress that would lead to inadvertence with respect to these actions, then yeah, I mean it would be sinful to exercise the will in cooperation with that disorder for precisely the same reason.
When you break them, God punishes you. This is nonsense.
And if that's the case when it comes to food, how much even more so is that the case when it comes to sex?
Not at all. Like, not in the slightest. Talk to a psychologist about eating disorders. Nobody will tell you that the harm is that it offends God, so he sends down shame as punishment. Eating disorders can harm people because of unhealthy societal pressures, uncontrollable compulsions, distortion of one's image, and a number...
Okay, first of all, there's no competitive relationship. This is between something being wrong because of its effects on the human person and something being wrong because it offends God. God is offended precisely because it harms or tarnishes his own, like us as images of his own self-image. Like that's it's all integrally connected.
Of other reasons, and we have evidence-based treatment to help people get better. But the DSM does not categorize being gay as a mental disorder, let alone any evidence-based treatment to stop being gay. In fact, every credible psychological association says that trying to change your sexuality and denying yourself is actually harmful.
You know, the church only basically says no to a couple things. One in particular is the genital sexual expression of affection.
What? That is an integral part about getting married, whether it's somebody of the same sex or the opposite sex.
There's no way that the genital sexual expression between two men or between two women meets the what it is forness. In fact, acting out on that is directly against the procreative element. And I can't act against it without disintegrating my own heart, my own life.
Says who? This is all just an assertion without any proof and without...
Yeah, this music is brutal.
Any means of investigating the claim that it violates the nature of sex. The thing that actually disintegrates the human person, according to actual research, is denying oneself, staying in the closet, trying to change one's sexuality, and hating themselves. That's what disintegrates the human person, not loving somebody. And just when you thought this train wreck of a talk could not get any worse, he's about to weaponize a story of his brother coming out to him.
I had to tell you something. Like, so, I'm gay.
Pop quiz, what is the correct response when somebody comes out to you?
What are you gonna do? You just shared with me an experience. You experience attraction to members of the same sex. That's all you told me.
The correct answer is not, what are you gonna do about it? Or use cult tactics to invalidate somebody's identity by just calling it an experience. Based off of that reaction, what do you think his brother thought growing up? Let's hear.
He would begin...
Like, this guy would have absolutely no... Like, he's disarming himself of any possible counter-argumentation to someone who comes out as, having sexual inclinations or proclivities toward, like, let's just say, immediate degrees of consanguinity, for the purpose of YouTube. He's disarming himself of any kind of argumentation that could adequately counteract those kinds of arguments. And maybe he bites the bullet on that. Maybe he says, okay, that's fine. They can do what they want as well. But at some point, if you disarm your, if you refuse to make use of any kind of arguments from natural teleology, you really lose the ability to engage in moral reasoning at all.
River Run sent $5. What? The non-compulsive aspects of eating disorders are indeed sinful, and frequently so. It's like alcoholism and thus offends God.
I mean, exactly. Like, just because it's rooted in some psychological dysfunction doesn't mean that it wouldn't be sinful to exercise the will in cooperation with with that disorder. All it really all it really can do is tell you like what your degree of personal culpability might be. Like psychological dysfunction, psychological inhibitions can impact the culpability of an act, but it cannot change or alter the moral status of an act.
Begin to let Jesus love him, and then he'd say, but no, you can't love me, because if people around me knew that this is my experience, then they wouldn't love me.
He thought that because he was right. The priest is making a very calculated and manipulative move here, and you're about to see exactly what I mean.
It just took till he was 27 to call me up and say, hey, we talk.
Yeah, I wonder why he waited until he was 27 to tell anybody.
But I guess I wish that I would have communicated in some way that if he wanted to, he could have told me earlier.
Thank you, Father Mike, for understanding the entire point of pride. Wearing a rainbow pin, talking to kids about inclusivity, having access to mental health support, vocalizing the fact that you're an ally. That's exactly how you could have let your brother know earlier that he could have came out. But he was right to be afraid of coming out. The next clip is what Father Mike says that his brother said to him, and I'll take sentences that were never said for 500.
Either you celebrate every decision I make, or you mean you hate me. It's like...
Well, that's literally what they say. Like that's they may not say it in precisely those words, but that's the ultimatum that those sentiments amount to in every case.
That's not real.
And that sentence was not real. I will take my 500 points.
No good parent accepts every decision their child makes. We love you. We're going to celebrate you. You don't have to agree with every decision you make.
This is exactly why I say Mike is being disingenuous and deceptive here. First of all, this entire framework presupposes being gay is wrong, so they can get away with this rebranding of love the sinner, hate the
Well, it doesn't presuppose it because he's made an argument against it that you haven't really sufficiently refuted at all. Like, he's made an argument, and so he's making a conclusion based on the arguments he's already made. So that's not presupposition at all.
Second, yes, I agree that parents have a role in helping their children weigh the pros and cons in making each life decision. In fact, your child falling in love is a beautiful thing. Your child getting married, potentially raising a family, that's a beautiful thing. And you and your homophobic family for not wanting to be a part of your brother's life.
I experienced a lot of brokenness in my life. And if I were to say that my experience is my...
Yeah, I mean, I think this guy is just trying to... I mean, what I'm seeing in this guy is not any kind of rational argumentation. I'm just seeing like a lot of built-up resentment.
Identity, then that would mean that I'm broken.
Once again, this entire argument relies on the church's understanding that being attracted to somebody of the same sex is, as the church says, direct disorder. There's not a single person out there who hates themselves in principle for being attracted to members of the opposite sex.
All of us have something in our lives that we hate about ourselves.
What? Yes, I agree that millions of queer people, especially those growing up in homophobic, dangerous institutions, feel shame about things, and it's because of talks like this. So what's the solution? One is evidence-based solutions. Accepting oneself, learning how to build a healthy life, learning how to build a happy relationship, living life to the fullest extent.
Can you just run that through like ChatGPT and they gave him like some generic like action items?
What he's telling you to do here is that you should really just be happier, that you're being forced by the church to be celibate for the rest of your life, that you can never fall in love with anybody else. And if you ever do that, you're going to be shunned by the church and sent to hell.
We've taken this huge concept of love, we reduced it to romantic love. And we've taken this concept of romantic love and reduced it to sex.
You already admitted that one of God's designs for sex is for bonding between partners, so where are we going?
River Run sent $2. Isn't it really interesting how homos need mental support all the time no matter what?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just it because it's... I don't think they've... For thousands of years, this is the most proactively supportive environment that they've been in. And yet it hasn't led to any kind of betterment for that for specifically like the mental health side of the equation. Like, and you know, they just keep kicking the can down the road. Like, oh, well, there's still too much homophobia. There's still too much homophobia. Once we get rid of it all, then like they're gonna be frolicking in meadows and well, I mean, I guess they kind of are already, but but you know, I mean, in a way that, you know, once we get rid of all the homophobia in the world, then, you know, you're just going to be living in this like idyllic utopia, and it just doesn't come to fruition.
There's a deeper love the Greeks called philia. Friendship is a more fulfilling love than eros.
Catholics love making these, well, there's 4 types of love arguments. And it's just dumb because obviously there's difference between friendship and romantic love. Well, I mean, sometimes I get a little bit confused. But you don't get married to your friends or build families with your friends.
In friendship, so much greater than eros, so much greater than romance, so much more life-giving, and so much more like Christ's love.
This is a really nice way of saying that straight couples can have amazing friendships and they can also marry people to whom they're attracted. But gay people can only ever have friendships and never actually fall in love with somebody. That's why this entire thing is deceptive and manipulative, because this is all the facade of the same harmful church teachings.
I cannot wait for the day when the church canonizes the first known homosexual man or homosexual woman saint who dedicated their lives to living chastely. The amazing thing is this, that person, that saint could be in this room.
This is a really convoluted way of saying, if you want to go to heaven, don't be gay. But as a consolation prize, we'll put up a poster of you and you can be a role model for all the other closeted teens out there. Now, what you're not hearing in this talk, and that he's...
Or you can, like, you know, have the beatific vision in heaven and not be separated from God from all eternity, right? Like that's the consolation prize. The consolation prize is heaven. Like the consolation prize is not being at war with your own nature, not suffering through an entire life of trauma-induced psychological dysfunction. Of having actual, like, spiritually enriching and spiritually nourishing relationships with other people, not abusing each other's bodies, like avoiding the health risks, the physical health risks that come to a lifestyle such as this. You know, it's like the perks of living a virtuous, chaste life are like, the more you think, like if you think about it for like 20 minutes, you can come up with like 20 perks.
Purposefully leaving out is that he is flipping love the sinner, hate the sin thing on its head, so that all you hear in this talk is be friends and you're awesome. What he is doing is telling teens that are in these harmful institutions who hate themselves, feel alone, saying, well, just be happier about it, because you don't have to say no to your desires, you just have to say yes to other things like loving God, which then still mean that you have to say no to things. He's just wrapping a pile of harmful, crappy beliefs in a bow and calling it a present and asking why you're not happy to receive it. But on a serious note, to the outside world, this might not seem convincing. He's talking to a bunch of scared, self-hating, closeted teens living a dangerous, harmful, homophobic institution, and oftentimes are worried about getting kicked out of the church and out of their families, and trying to pad a 2x4 that he's still going to hit you in the head with. If you're dealing with and exploring your queer identity as a Catholic, it is a very lonely path, but what I can tell you, as somebody who is thoroughly in the church, daily mass, daily rosary, daily adoration, I was going to go off to become a Carmelite monk. Things do get better over time, and you will learn one day to be able to love yourself. I promise.
Again, what words would he have for somebody who has arguably inbuilt proclivities toward sexual activities that both he and I would acknowledge are morally wrong or problematic? He has no words to say to that person. He would have to resort to the very same kinds of words of consolation that Father Mike has been using, maybe in secularized terms, but he would have to fundamentally resort to the very same kinds of argumentation that he is making fun of, that he's mocking, that he's ridiculing. And he wouldn't have any arguments of his own to make.
This video isn't meant to be a complete refutation. It would take a long time to actually break down all of this crazy language that they're using, and this is why nobody on YouTube can...
You have to cope for not being able to do it.
actually break down Catholic content because it's so complex, and words don't mean what you think that they mean from an outside perspective, and I'm more than happy to actually break down what is wrong with theology of the body and teleology. And if there's any other crazy Catholic videos out there that you want me to react to, leave a comment down below. And remember,
So there's one more of these that I have to look through.
if you have ever tried to
So here's the next one. This one will go through a little bit faster.
buy chastity.com but seen that it's taken and wondered who the hell owns chastity.com. That would be the man whose video we're reacting to today, in which Jason Everett tries to give us a third option to homosexuality. Let's jump in.
Well, I think the world will tell you when it comes to homosexuality, you only got two options.
I doubt it, but let's hear it out.
You can hide in the closet out of fear that if anyone knew you felt that way, they would hate you and be bigoted.
It's kind of crazy. Like, one thing I notice is that people of this sexual expression of the sexual persuasion, we could say. I'm trying to be careful with my language, but who deconvert from Catholicism, traditional Catholicism, their areas of interest completely shift from what was once like other centered, other oriented, very interested in things of the mind, the abstract, the lofty. It's a hard shift from that to a totalizing obsession with sexuality, with arguing about sexuality, talking about sexuality, making videos about sexuality, and it becomes completely a self-absorbed descent, like a descent into complete self-absorption, narcissism, and that's where all they can talk about is their sexual identity, and that becomes protracted years into the future after they've deconverted. So they used to be interested in all kinds of things like history, philosophy, metaphysics, religion, theology. Now it's just laser focused on sexuality, and that's it. I notice this very frequently.
Against you
And try to take your civil rights away.
come out of the closet, embrace your sexual attractions as your identity, forget about God, the church, and the Bible, and do whatever.
Which is actually like the opposite of what they tend to accuse socially conservative Catholics of. They would say that, no, you're obsessed with sexuality because you're closeted. When in reality, like, that's one thing they talk about, but they also talk about other things too, like theology, history, philosophy, metaphysics. It's really when if some of them deconvert in order to live a certain a lifestyle consistent with their sexual persuasion, that then they start to become obsessed with these issues, and that's all they can talk about.
Whatever you want with your body.
Based. I'll take that option. What's the bad option that he's gonna present? Oh, that was supposed to be the bad option.
Those are your options. Gay pride or gay shame.
I like how they're trying to use gay pride as a pejorative here. But on a serious note, the Catholic Church is the one holding up this false dichotomy. There's a plethora of ways to be queer, much to conservative chagrin. You can pick your labels, explore your identity. You can be gay however you want.
Imagine
So all these cuts. I don't like all these cuts. Just speak your sentence.
feel kind of stuck in the middle here.
Now you see who this video is really aimed at. This video isn't for queer people living happy, healthy, fulfilled lives. This isn't for straight Catholics in the pews. Who he's talking to here is closeted, emotionally stunted Catholics who feel unsafe in their own skin because they experience same-sex attraction.
I don't really want to reject God, but I mean, gay shame? Is that my only option?
The majority of traditional Catholics will not accept you and will hate you.
You don't choose your attractions, just your behavior.
Let's bring up Catholic Translate. But what they're really saying here is that you can never go on a date, hold hands, get married, be in a relationship, have kids with somebody who you're...
Again, you could say the same thing about a couple within the same degree of consanguinity. They are also barred from those kinds of romantic expressions because they derive their intelligibility from the conjugal act. And the conjugal act is off limits for them. I would hope you would acknowledge that as well. And so, therefore, all related expressions are off the table. I mean, again, it's the same exact kind of uh, situation that homosexual couples are in. The only difference is that you don't regard those as morally problematic, and I do, but we would regard other expressions of sexuality as morally problematic, morally wrong, and they they have the same exact set of options. They have to learn to live a life of virtue outside the confines of those expressions of sexuality. You would acknowledge that as well.
Attracted to.
If you believe in traditional marriage, you're a hateful, homophobic bigot. But is this the case?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Well, you're wrong. If bigoted means anything, I think we can agree that bigoted means standing against people's civil rights. Every queer person supports traditional marriage, meaning that they believe Jason should be able to get married. But Jason and traditional Catholics say that the other group shouldn't be able to get married and wants to take away people's civil rights. And so if bigot means anything, Jason, you're absolutely a bigot.
Not long ago, I went to a store to buy a frame.
I'll take stores that didn't happen for $500.
And I put the big painting down on the desk, and the framer came out, and he said, I used to be a Catholic boy, but church doesn't want me anymore.
They want you just to stop being gay.
I said, well, what do you mean the church doesn't want you? And he opened his heart up to me about homosexuality.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the guy didn't say, hey, can I open my heart up to you about homosexuality? What the guy probably just said is gay, but Jason literally cannot bring himself to respect people's self-reported identities. He has to say, struggle with homosexuality. The same way that somebody would say that they opened their heart about alcoholism.
The church wants you. This is your home. God loves you. I love you.
This is just some good old-fashioned love bombing.
And he said, can I hug you?
I want my 500 points right now.
And I think that he was so touched because he knew I loved him. And I loved him enough to tell him the truth, that your sexual attractions are not your identity.
How would they not be? You and I date different genders. We go about living our lives in very different ways. Like I said in my last video, all the church is doing is taking...
Again, this guy, he claims to really understand the Catholic position. He claims to really understand it, and on the basis of his own personal history in the Catholic Church, he thinks that on that basis he has some unique credibility to speak about this issue. But what you find out is that he really doesn't understand the position, because if he did, then he would easily understand, he would easily acknowledge that even if he doesn't agree with the metaphysics of it, Catholic metaphysics demands that someone's ontological identity cannot reduce to, or rather I should say, immoral activities or disordered inclinations. They cannot pertain to the essential identity of the human person insofar as that identity is ontologically positive, right? Evil, disordered inclinations, they are deprivations of a due good. That's the Catholic metaphysics on what evil is. And so if you adopt a realist vision of the world, a philosophically realist vision of the world, it's metaphysically impossible for disordered inclinations to pertain to the real positive identity of what something is or what a person is. And his inability to understand that, to comprehend that, well, that just speaks to his lack of familiarity with the subject matter itself.
The same harmful teachings about what to do with your sexuality and rephrasing it in a little bit of a nicer light.
If I define myself by my sexual attractions, I don't know, my life's gonna get real confusing real fast.
Is Jason gonna admit to not being straight? No.
If I'm attracted to a woman who's not my wife, is that my identity?
Nope, you're still straight.
If I drive by a pornographic billboard and I think she's pretty, like, is that my identity?
No, you're still straight.
The world is telling us that, like, if you experience this feeling, that's who you are.
You are shadowboxing straw men here and saying that you're winning. The queer community is the one that's saying that you are not just your identity. You can live a perfectly normal life, exploring your identity, dating whoever you want. The church is the one saying that your experience limits and drastically changes how you go about living your life.
What the church affirms is that a person is a rational being. And what that means is there's really only three kinds of persons. There's divine persons.
I'm gonna stop the unverifiable ranting right there. Notice how we can never have a productive conversation about homosexuality without bringing in religion. He offers no arguments against homosexuality that don't already grant that the Catholic Church is the one true church that if you disagree with, you're gonna burn in hell for forever.
If you're a human who has homosexual attractions, you know what kind of person you are?
Gay. Next question.
You're a son of God, or you're a daughter of God.
Or a baby of God, or a child of Thor, or a daughter of Allah, or offspring of Krishna. We can play.
It's like this guy clearly, he was probably raised in a traditional Catholic environment, but he clearly never really engaged with high-level Catholic theology, because if he did, he wouldn't be making comparisons to Thor or any kind of polytheistic deities of any kind. I mean, this is like classic like new atheist Dawkins 101, and it's just kind of a shame that he was in this environment that was supposed to expose him to an a certain intellectual tradition, a certain degree of intellectual rigor, but I guess it just never reached him.
Play word games all you want, Jason. And pro tip, if somebody ever says you are beloved daughter or son of the Father, they're about to say the most vile directly afterwards, then think that they're doing you a favor.
I basically either have to obey the church and live a life of loneliness and desolation.
That is what all the scientific literature shows.
Or disregard the church and face damnation? Are these my only two options?
No, according to actual science, you can live a happy, healthy, perfectly fulfilled life as a queer person and date whichever gender you prefer.
The church is not telling anybody that they can't love.
No, it definitely is.
I would argue that the Catholic Church is just about one of the only institutions on earth that's actually challenging us all to truly love.
Ironic. Jason is providing a quote from a man who systematically covered up the abuse of children and also somebody who's never been married before to tell you what love really means. And here's the entire debate on homosexuality in a nutshell. One side's using science and logic and common sense and law to talk about what does it mean for somebody to live a good life, versus on the religious side, what we're doing is taking the goalposts of what it means for somebody's true good to not be anything verifiable or anything we can investigate, and instead have it be these vague standards that are only intelligible if you already grant that Catholicism is the one true church.
The world is so hyper.
No, I mean, it's just not true. I mean, you've yourself attempted to refute an argument rooted in Aristotelian teleology, so you can at least acknowledge that there is more to these arguments than what you're saying.
Sexualized. I mean, think about it. You turn on the TV, every product, every car, every piece of gum, this deodorant, everything becomes sexualized.
I just crossed off my everything is sexualized these days space on my bingo card of Catholic talking points to bring up when we talk about homosexuality.
I was at a store and I saw a magazine there. It was like a craftsmanship, woodworking magazine for carpentry, and it said on the cover that inside were the blueprints for sexy shutters. And I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, is this what we've come to, sexy shutters?
This is what we're yapping about, Jason? You got so triggered by goddamn blinds that you brought this into your epic takedown of the gay agenda, whatever that is?
You might not have heard this before, but you're supposed to be attracted to members of the same sex. You heard that correctly, because God made them very good.
He did make many, many well-endowed twinks. Thank you, Father God.
I knew a guy who lived a very actively promiscuous
That's just gross.
gay lifestyle.
Holy shit, I'm gonna risk everything on today's Daily Double.
He said, I realized I wasn't homosexual.
He's bisexual, pansexual, transgender?
He said, I realized I was homo-emotional.
Guess I get my points for my Daily Double.
I was longing for the attention, the approval, the affection, and the admiration.
This guy's clearly just overcompensating. Like, he's clearly recently supposedly come to terms in his mind with who he thinks he really is. And so he's just deliberately trying to inject as much malice into uh, his rebuttal as he can, because it's probably like a therapeutic uh, process for him. Like he's just feels really good about being able to express things that probably feels like he was like restricted from expressing in the past. And so really, what I'm getting at is this is just psychological venting on his part. He's not really making any sincere arguments here. He's just this is just a therapy session for him, I think, and it's really sad.
Of another man, which I never received from my own father.
And now I can cross off being gay is just having daddy issues on my bingo card. Once again, no science supports this hypothesis.
I'm not saying from this that...
And notice he doesn't point to his own life as a counterexample, and I wonder why.
Nobody has sexual attractions for members of the same sex.
Then why do you bring this story up? You can't just bring this up and then say, well, I'm not actually saying what the entire point of this story is. The entire point of the story is that maybe you're not actually gay. Maybe you just have daddy issues. That's exactly what you're saying, and then saying you're not saying what you're actually saying. Let's talk about marriage equality now.
Well, I think the problem with marriage equality is that
marriage is a legal institution. We shouldn't use the Bible as a legal document.
That slogan might fit well on a bumper sticker, but it really doesn't say anything.
Marriage means marriage, and equality means equality for gay people. So what that means, Jason, is that gay people want to be able to get married. We have to understand that Jason's no longer talking about the church's teaching. What he's talking about is taking away millions of people's civil rights to get married. Here's the legal rights that marriage confers, because marriage is a legal institution. So every time Jason's about to ask a dumb rhetorical question, let's compare it to our list of rights that marriage entails.
If I wanted to marry 2 women, are you in favor of marriage equality for us?
Run the list of rights. Gay marriage doesn't have to change any of those rights on the list, and it's super simple, versus I'm open to the idea of multi-person marriages from a legal institution, but we'd have to radically rethink everything.
We want to have a marriage that's open. Do you think that's a marriage?
Yo, does sleeping with other people affect any of the rights on our list? Nope, so I think people in open relationships should still be able to have all of those legal rights.
Well, let's say I'll be faithful, but we don't want it to be permanent. Instead of, entering into wedlock, we're going to have kind of wed lease.
Does that affect anything on our list? Yep, we'd have to rethink most of those rights to have wed lease, but gay marriage doesn't actually affect anything on that list.
Well, I saw a woman on the news recently who married herself. Is that a real marriage?
You gotta be kidding me, Jason. Your kids need to take away your Facebook account. Nobody who marries themselves is talking about any of the rights on our list.
Is it simply a human institution ratified by the government?
Yes.
Or is marriage from God the Father?
Nope, try arguing that one in court.
It should be free, total, faithful, and fruitful.
Nope, those are not conditions in any state to get married.
2 people of the same sex could be faithful to one another, but the question is, can their bodies totally give themselves to the other?
If gay sex is enough to send me to hell, I think it's good enough to consummate a marriage.
When you love someone, you have to speak the truth to them.
But it doesn't give you a right to disrespect their boundaries.
The Catholic Church has canonized people as saints who've been from all walks of life.
He's doing the I can't wait until self-hating gay becomes a saint of the church to be used as a model for other self-hating gays in the future.
This whole worldview is just boring, right? Like it's like he thinks that marriage, human sexuality, it's really just reducible to these secular constructs, legal realities, legal definitions. It's just such a boring world to live in, where everything is just reducible to what is to it's not just reducible to one's own life, but reducible to nothing that can really point beyond itself. And that's what's really like tragic about a worldview like this. There's just no ultimate directionality to it. It's all just yeah, I mean there's really no words for it at some point. Like it's just a very kind of depressing way to ultimately live, and I hope this guy finds some peace. I hope that he turns his life around a bit. I hope that he comes to realize that what he's what he thought was the church's position on these things was um I hope he realizes that he's had an inadequate understanding of that, and I hope that somebody at least can go to him and uh, point to the actual truth of what the church teaches. I mean, it's yeah.
And I look forward to the day in the Catholic Church where there are canonized saints who experienced homosexual attractions and chose to glorify God with their bodies.
But not gay people who are genuinely good people.
In those moments of your life when you sometimes don't accept yourself and you don't feel accepted by others,
leave the hateful institution telling you those things and find a licensed therapist.
know that God is always the one who accepts you.
And will burn you in a lake of fire for billions of years.
Because I'm sick and tired of the media telling us that we all hate each other.
Then stop hating and trying to take away people's civil rights, Jason.
Because that's not true.
It is.
We love you and we need you in our lives as well. And the church is your home.
It's a home with a hateful, psychopathic father that if you break his unscientific rules, you will have your flesh burned off for billions of years on end. I've listened and read hundreds of hours worth of Jason's content, and he's one of the first people.
Why? Why would you do that? Like, if you're really unbothered, if you are really at peace with yourself, if you're really in like a state of like in inner harmony, why would you go out of your way to expose yourself to hundreds of hours, as you say, of of content that expresses a worldview that you claim to have left behind entirely? I mean, clearly you're dealing with some remnants of a conscience that is currently bothering you. You are dealing with the last vestiges of an active conscience that's telling you that the life you've chosen, the lifestyle that you've chosen, is at odds with your most authentic self. And what more evidence do you need than you feeling the need to watch hundreds of hours of this worldview being expressed? You know, I mean, you're clearly trying to prove something to yourself in doing that. You're clearly, there's some part of you that's unconvinced that that is not at ease, that is not um, at peace with what you've chosen to do, and you feel the constant need to refute. It's kind of like you know how in some of the Psalms that refer to uh, laying waste to the enemy completely. Um, like you need to lay waste entirely to every single last um, tidbit of argumentation in support of the Catholic worldview, or else you're just not going to be at peace. And you do that because, on some level, you are still struggling with the remnants of conscience.
People that started bringing me into the church because I was young, gay, and naive and didn't know what to do inside of the church. Followed his logic, went to mass every day, prayed the rosary every day, was on track to become a monk, until I actually started looking into his arguments, looking beyond the flowery words and the euphemisms. Is there...
See, you see it so often with these people that, you know, I'm almost inclined to say that he may have at one point really understood the Catholic position. He may have at one point had a clearer understanding of the church's view on human sexuality and now has forgotten it. It's actually something that happens rather frequently where someone deconverts and then you notice that they start forgetting things that they used to know. They start making arguments that they used to thoroughly understand were unsound arguments. They just the rigor of their argumentation declines rapidly, and eventually they become what they once fully understood was a laughable um, they like a laughable position. They begin making arguments that they used to know were really bad and dumb arguments. They become stupid. Like they really do. Sin does ultimately make you dumb. It darkens the intellect. It darkens the mind. It it dims the interior illumination of the intellect. And you see it in action when somebody deconverts as a result of sexual hangups. I mean, it's just so frequent. And in some cases, you can literally point to them refutations of the arguments that they're currently making that they used to write. And refutations that they're not able to refute themselves when they're the ones who made those refutations before they deconverted. And it's just this is just a classic example of it. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy, like at one point, would have been able to refute every single thing that he said in this video. Like you may even be able to find things that he wrote that if you presented those things that he wrote to him right now, he would not really be able to refute. Would not surprise me at all.
A single shred of evidence to back it up. No, there's not. And since deconstructing and leaving the faith, I've never been happier. I'm in a great relationship, I'm living a great life, and if you want to tell me that I'm going to go to hell, there's no way that you can actually prove that to me, so I'm just going to ignore you. But on a serious note, I'll be releasing a long lecture of why I think the Catholic Church has absolutely no proof for its position on homosexuality if you want a longer, drier lecture. And like always, remember to gay the pray away.
That was really fringe and dumb. All right, well, that was that was something. That's probably one of the more enjoyable one of these patron requests, just because it gives an opportunity to provide real catechesis, real sound explanation of why the church teaches what she does teach when it comes to this topic. And again, I just want to reiterate the importance of contextualizing this conversation within a cosmic framework. You know, it's not just because homosexual acts, masturbatory acts, etc. It's not just because they go against like the procreative teleological end of like the sexual organs that they're wrong. I mean, they're wrong because they contradict, they go against, they undermine the they undermine what is integral to the entire order of the universe. The whole cosmos, like the whole great chain of being is structured in a gendered way, in gendered expressions. That like the male and the female principles are interwoven into the fabric of reality itself. And we can point to metaphysics, we can point to, you know, theological dualities as well, but like even sticking to the metaphysical order, form and matter. Form, you have the active principle, and matter, you have the passive principle. Form gives intelligibility, structure to matter, and matter is able to receive. It is receptive. It has a certain like receptivity points to like what is characteristic about matter, receiving form, and in so doing, procreatively brings about the complete composite substance. And then that active and passive relationship between form and matter, that's reflected in the active and passive relationship between, the active existence and essence. It's reflected in the relationship between the soul and the body, right? The soul gives the body its principle of animation, its intelligibility, its formality, its principle of vitality, and the body um, receives this principle of animation and nurtures it, uh, integrates this principle of life within it, to become a uh, a living organism, a living organism, that has its own uh, like interior dwelling place of this principle of life that it's received. And that relationship between the body and the soul, like that is a marital relationship. It's a nuptial union. Which is why, murder is wrong. Like, murder is wrong because it goes against, what God has joined together. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. I mean, that's true for the relationship between the soul and the body. It's this it's this nuptial union. And this kind of male and female duality, this active principle, this passive principle, it's reflected again and again and again at higher and higher and higher and higher and higher levels of reality. And marriage is situated within that ensemble. Like, marriage is situated within this broader scheme of the cosmos. And if you undermine the church's teaching on human sexuality, you also thereby undermine the rest of the church's theology about the intimacy that we're meant to have with God, the intimacy between Christ and the church, the intimacy between the divine and the human natures of Christ. It's all nuptial. Like, it's all nuptial language. And and it's a nuptial cosmos that we live in. So that's fundamentally why there's so much gravity attached to the do's and don'ts of human sexuality, because this is the grand cosmic icon of what is central to the meaning of the universe, right? And so toying with that, thwarting that, undermining that, it 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 uh, it offends something so much deeper than itself. And um, so that's kind of like my contribution to this discussion, really. I mean, this is the contribution that I've been trying to make. Um, but uh, but yeah, let me just look through the chat to see if anyone's asked any interesting questions or made any interesting points. Thank you also for all the support. I really appreciate it. Thank you, River Run. Thank you to others who have donated. I really enjoy doing these streams with all of you. Um, but I'm not seeing any like real questions in the chat. I see a lot of great points being made, but not a lot of questions. And yeah, so the person who had me do this says that you most likely affirm that, or isn't murder also wrong due to taking away the great good and offending against the value of human? Well, yes, of course. Like, there are multiple reasons for it, but I guess what I was kind of getting at was, uh, I think it gets to like the most fundamental reason why, because God can take away human life, and God can sanction the state to take away human life, and God can sanction the state to engage legitimately in warfare. Um, but human beings of their own accord cannot do that. And I think it's because the relationship between the soul and the body is one that it's a kind of intimacy that God has established, that God has ordained, and that we cannot mess with. Um, and and also, um, what you said about parent and child relationships. I think that you certainly wouldn't necessarily refer to them as nuptial, but you do have a certain similarity in the kind of duality going on there. Like there's the active and the passive. Um, you can kind of say in a certain sense, uh, what the husband is to the wife in terms of that active and passive relationship. The parents are to children, but of course, taking sexuality itself entirely out of the equation. And this is also, there's a certain relativity to it when you apply it to other things too. Like, for example, we are feminine in relationship to God, but we are masculine in relationship to uh, the world that we have dominion over, or just within the human person himself. The soul is feminine in relationship to God, but the soul is masculine in relationship to the body. So there is a relativity to this, but it utilizes the same dynamic. The same principles are at play. So so that's what I have to say about that. Um, God bless all of you, and